Thank you, everyone, for joining us. My name is Abby Sun, and I'm the Director of Artist Programs at IDEA and the Conference Director of Getting Real. Thank you so much for being here. I will be your moderator today for one of my most anticipated conversations of Getting Real. This one is entitled Evolving Mandates in Public Media. And first of all, I just want to thank our ASL interpreters and also our card captioner for helping us provide access. Many of our captioners and interpreters are working the entire day of the conference, so let's give them a round of applause as well. Day means 8 a.m. to midnight because we have parties and all of that. So thank you very much. Then one of the things that, okay, so in terms of the format of this event, I'm going to set the stage super briefly and introduce our 4 esteemed panelists. And then we will have a group discussion between all of us. And then we'll try to leave as much time, about half an hour, for an audience Q&A as possible. Yeah, just to get us started, usually when I go to industry conferences and to film festivals and any other places where we have conversations like this occur, when we have conversations about public media, it's usually about, it's with the heads of different organizations that we might consider public media in the US, about their programming mandates, perhaps, but it never actually includes a diversity of the types of organizations and the types of jobs that might occur in public media. We had a pre-panel discussion and it was quite raucous because I don't think even between us, we could decide on what was public media and how has public media, especially in the US, because all of us are US based on this panel, how has it evolved and how should it evolve in the future? I think we generally agree on where it should evolve, but as we all know, the devil is in the details. But starting closest to me, I have Luis Ortiz, the Managing Director of Latino Public Broadcasting. And I'm sure also here representing the National Multicultural Alliance, of which LPB is one of 5 member organizations. I hope we'll be able to touch on the history of the NMCA and just how vital it has been in diversifying the content and the mandate of public media in our country. Next, we have Ken Ikeda, currently executive producer of a podcast named Viewers Like Us, which all of you should listen to if you haven't already, but has formally weaved in and out of organizations that are part of perhaps public radio as well as BAVAC. We have some BAVAC members here. Thank you, Ken, for your work at BAVAC. We also have Wendy Levy, who is the executive director of the, I'm actually looking this up because yes, of the Alliance for Media Arts and Culture, who has a long background not only in documentary filmmaking and what we now in the emerging technology space called flat films or flat, but has also worked in new media, creating fellowships within and without the public media system, serves as an advisor for many arts organizations and arts nonprofits. And finally, at the end of our line, we have Talia Rosen, who is the Vice President of Standards and Practices at PBS. For those who are filmmakers who have worked in public media, we have heard from many of you that standards and practices is the thing that you fear the most. So we are very much looking forward to hearing from Talia about how something as maybe hidebound as standards and practices also can change. So I'm going to start us off. Yeah, give them a round of applause. So one of the things that I'm really curious about, let's to start off with, is this is a huge question, but one of the things that I think always complicates this discussion of public media is this perhaps idea that public media is never able to change and is going the way of Ken Burns documentaries. Very popular with the retired and over 60 crowd, but nobody else has any idea what is happening in public media. So I'd actually love to hear from everyone. Why should we care about public media?
Okay, I guess I'll start. I think public media is PBS is a membership organization, that serves local independent PBS stations, and it provides content through partnerships from various independent production companies and filmmakers, and that's how that content comes together. And while yes, they showcase bigger series, maybe like Ken Burns that you referenced to, but I think it is a place where stories from diverse communities also are showcased and highlighted where you wouldn't see on commercial media. I don't think programs like Who Killed Vincent Chin or Eyes on the Prize or series like the Latino Americans or the Asian Americans would have been possible or showcased in commercial media. And I think for me, that has been the difference when it comes to dealing with public media and why it matters and why it's different from your standard commercial media.
Yeah, and Louise, for those who might not be familiar with films like Who Killed Vincent Chin and series like Eyes on the Prize, could you maybe try to describe perhaps some defining characteristics about what makes them so powerful and also so uncommercial?
I think, primarily what we see is documentary film. That's a long-form documentary film that's showcased on PBS and within public media. But it's also trying to showcase and through the work maybe at the National Multicultural Alliance, we are trying to showcase untold stories from our communities that maybe haven't received the right attention on the commercial media side, or also showcase more in-depth profiles on certain issues, certain social issues, certain important figures within our communities, and also positive stories that come from our communities, because we have a lot of those too. And I think that's where I see maybe a difference.
All right, thank you, Louise. This is Abby speaking, and just we received a reminder from chat to state our names when we speak. I think that's a really powerful articulation of what also a mandate means when it comes to public media. Would anyone else like to add anything? Lots.
This is Talia. So I have a few different thoughts here. I want to try to add, why should we care about public media? I think that public media, and I can't speak for all of public media because it is so much bigger than PBS. It includes American Public Television, the National Educational Telecommunications Association, the World Channel. So, I mean, one of our greatest strengths in public media is how decentralized we are and how locally owned and operated everything is within public media, from TPT to KQED. It is a very sprawling system, but I think one of the strengths of this system is that decentralization, because there are so many sort of laboratories within the different pockets across the country that can experiment and try things. And what drives, I think, all of us is this non-commercial mission to fill market failures, to do things that are not being done in the commercial space. And, I'm a little biased since I work in standards, but I think the standards are one of the key things that sets us apart. I feel like the word documentary is being co-opted by marketing departments at commercial streaming organizations, and that what we are doing in public media is really focused on true, authentic documentary that does not have conflicts of interest, that doesn't have, you read some of these articles about some of the practices at these commercial platforms. So I think that remaining true to our principles and our standards is what sets us apart and makes us vital. before the panel, Abby and I were talking about whether our YouTube originals are documentaries or not. I think of them as documentary shorts, but I think one of the places that people don't always realize we are evolving is through something called PBS Digital Studios that is reaching people in Gen Z and millennials through YouTube originals. I think PBS Voices and PBS Origins are two of the most powerful and dynamic contemporary things that we're doing that are reaching younger people and more diverse audiences, and broadening the talent pool. So I don't want to just hype up that content, but I think that it is relevant and will continue to be relevant. I think it's more relevant today than it was 10 years ago, based on what I'm seeing happening in the commercial media landscape.
Yeah, and Talia also corrected me because I had seen some of the like Aeon science videos on YouTube, but it's not just science videos as well.
Everything.
Yeah, I think public media matters because, we all believe in the power of storytelling. To convince minds, to drive movements, and to reflect everyday people and their experiences. And when it's through a trusted platform, and particularly when it's endorsed sort of by the top of that pyramid, which is PBS, history is at stake. What gets memorialized, what gets taught in classrooms, the fact that in terms of infrastructure, it has the broadest reach into every classroom, right? YouTube is still blocked. Kids work around it, but it's blocked. PBS is not. So, having grown up in the 70s and 80s, like my version of what Christopher Columbus did and was rudely retaught to me in college. So I think about that all the time for viewers like us. We're building generations of efforts to hold public broadcasting more accountable to being like the public. That's why it's called Viewers Like Us. So I think that's why it matters. I think that's why it's worth continuously revisiting and fighting for.
Maybe we could and just move on a little bit into thinking about if public media matters and viewers like us. Maybe you could describe a little bit what is the kind of thrust and content of Viewers Like Us, and what kind of future it's actually arguing for when it comes to public media, because I'd actually really like to spend the bulk of our time on that part.
Sure. Just as quick background, it was inspired by a provocation that Grace Lee wrote for the Ford Foundation. And it asked basically who made Ken Burns America's Storyteller. And it really dove into this notion that there's a singular person through which the public gets to learn about our history, our shared history. Sorry, that's scary. And so really through that exploration, we really looked at pivotal moments in which the system's been challenged and called to behave in a more transparent and collaborative manner. And particularly in the recent history, this notion that PBS feels like it's meeting the moment, right? Post George Floyd, it's meeting the moment, and we ask, well, how so? What are the numbers, right? And I feel it particularly here in this conference because we've all been starving for a community. This room is part of that community, right? It's also part of the creative force. It's providing content that ultimately drives that space. And yet it's incredibly difficult to have an actual conversation. Like Talia's been extraordinarily accessible and easy to engage with, and that's been wonderful. But as a system, public media operates with a number of tiers, and how we get to participate with each other in this ecosystem really varies. So that's essentially what the series is challenging and questioning. Yeah, we had one season and we're going to persist with another.
Does the series end on a hopeful note? I've actually debated this with some friends.
I think so. I need to step back, and I'm aging out already. So there's a whole nother generation. And, Grace was the host. Akintunde was a lead investigative reporter. He is the next generation. He'll continue that work. He's here somewhere in the audience. So, I have no concern that this will continue because it's that important. It just gets back to why does it matter? It absolutely matters.
Wendy, do you have any thoughts? I know you have thoughts on this.
I have many thoughts. I'm not exactly sure where to start, but I think the idea of public media is such a monolith. And I think in so many ways, public media that should be for the people, by the people. For me, it's the exercise of democracy. But it feels inaccessible, I think, to the many filmmakers. And I look at the series that I treasure, like POV and Independent Lens, that when I was, first started watching public media, I could never imagine that movies like that could be on there. And now that they are, I think I feel that it's really important to look at the institution of public media, not so much from the project perspective, but from the systems perspective, because there's a way now that we have more films that are about a more diverse and plural culture, and more filmmakers are involved. I think that there's the system itself. We want to make sure that those projects don't cover up a system that needs some reform. And how do we get it? How do we get at that? How do we who are outside the public media system help to support the innovation that's needed? And what's the cost of that innovation? As we were preparing for this panel, and I'm always the one that's like, innovation, yes, let's try the newest thing, let's throw things at the wall, see what sticks. I'm not sure that's the best role for PBS or NPR, even, that there is somehow a need for a slower, more institutional acting body that actually can make and hold space for the broadest audiences. And we're looking for those independent filmmakers. They're wanting to work with ITVS. They're wanting to get on the system because it's where they can reach so many people. So I think it's exciting to be at this juncture of being able to see the power of public media and its need for change and how we can operate within that.
I'd like to push back a little bit on this. There is a sense that public media has kind of made progress when it comes to content, but there's also this other sense that I hear among filmmakers that public media has actually gotten a lot more conservative in its content over the last few years. If we look at the history of POV, for instance, a series that we are talking about with a lot of acclaim, and whose current executive director, Erica Dilday, gave a keynote yesterday. Just a shout out, Erica. In the late 80s and the early 90s, ITVS was able to fund extraordinarily radical filmmaking before they were cut off by the US Congress in the Contract for America 1992 election. So in the late 80s and the early 90s, public media was able to fund filmmakers like Camille Phillips and Marlon Riggs, who we would consider experimental filmmakers these days. Channel 4 did the same thing with Sankofa Collective and Black Audio Film Collective Films. And today, Channel 4 is being privatized in the UK and no longer has any mandate for experimental films. So I think that in this sense, kind of, where do we, is the progress that we're even talking about something that is real? What has actually changed?
I can start there, and I think that whether it's changing from the PBS standpoint or not, the overall media landscape is changing, and everybody is recognizing that, and you have to make changes to stay relevant within that media landscape, and in comparing it to the 80s and 90s, we also have to take into consideration, the evolution of media from that point, because, PBS was one of the few places that was showcasing this work. And when cable became, the huge monster that it was, you started to have more competition, and it was harder to get these films done. And I think as the streamers have come up, it's, there's a lot of other places, so you don't have, and there's less funding out, in the foundation world to support it. So, there's so much more competition in that sense, and I think that that's been part of it.
Yes, it's important to remember that ITBS has been funded at this essentially the same dollar amount as in the early 90s as now. There has been no increase for inflation.
And I'll just add too that CPB, who is, one of the big funders with behind all of these public media institutions, have also, remained flat for the last 10 years. So, yet, they've been trying to contribute more. They've contributed more to the National Multicultural Alliance, but they've also done more contributions to other diversity efforts as well. But there is a funding issue in that sense.
In terms of one thing that's changing that I wanted to speak to, I don't know if this is the right part of the panel, but in thinking about evolving mandates in public media, I was thinking a lot about the work I've been doing with the Documentary Accountability Working Group and with Natalie Bullock-Brown and Sonia Childress and Pat Ofterheide. They released this framework a week or so ago that is phenomenal, a framework for accountability and ethics that I encourage everyone to check out. And in talking with them, I've been thinking a lot in the last few months about how we can evolve PBS's standards to really encourage and endorse non-extractive filmmaking practices. I don't know how far to have this away. So I think in the coming weeks, we are hoping to release some guidance that makes explicit that certain non-extractive filmmaking practices are consistent with PBS's values, principles, and editorial standards. A lot of this for me is motivated by a report that I have pinned up on my bulletin board that came out of the Center for Social and Media, CMSA, Media and Social Impact. Professor Ofterheide and her colleague Marissa Woods put out this report all about the state of the documentary field last year. And there was this quote in there that said the PBS standards are widely regarded as unduly onerous and restrictive, which is entirely reasonable, even though I wrote them. So, no, I mean, I really took that to heart, and it caused me to really reflect a lot over the past 6 months about what in those standards is onerous and restrictive, what in those standards is unnecessarily onerous and restrictive that we could change, and where are we being restricted that we feel, or that I feel, is really important and valuable. And so a number of you participated in these filmmaker listening sessions that Professor Ofterheide helped me conduct earlier this year, where I'm sort of asked that open-ended question, like, what is it in the standards that is onerous and restrictive? And, what we heard centered around a few areas, and I don't want to take over this conversation or anything, but I want to talk about what's changing. And there was already a phenomenal panel about this at 10 a.m. With Jennifer Teixeira and others about these issues, but we're going to be changing to clearly acknowledge that compensating participants in some circumstances is absolutely in alignment with our principles and values, that pre-screening for participants is absolutely in alignment with our principles and values, with the editorial standards, that providing mental health resources is something we see as really important and essential in various circumstances, and that active, affirmative, ongoing, and informed consent is 100% essential. I think it was one of the panelists this morning talked about like open and honest communication being essential. And then Jen Teixeira talked about this idea of a consent calendar, which I just like ran up to her after the panel. And I said, I need to know more about that so I can adopt it with credit. So we're looking at changing to really embrace all of those things, because in these listening sessions, we were hearing that essentially filmmakers are already doing all of these things on independent lens and POV, but they feel like they have to do it in the shadows because they feel like it might violate these standards that we have. And what I want to say is it doesn't, I don't think it violates the standards at all. I think it is a way to live the standards and live those ethics. We can come back later to some of the things I think
Yeah.
change in the
Well,
standards.
Actually, I would, we'll come back to that. Because I would like to try to connect some threads here because I think something that Ken said earlier is very important. Public media is not just one organization or one person or even the head of PBS or the head of CPB. So Talia, I do believe that you're operating within a system for this, but you're also you kind of have an enclosed department as well. But there's a lot of other things that are also happening. So I'm actually wondering if maybe at this point, I don't want to get too readed, but I'm curious to kind of probe a little bit more about perhaps systemic change that we want to see, and how that can maybe not change what is so vital about public media at the same time. So some of the things that we've identified as being vital for public media is that at least there's a sense that it strives to, or it can be held accountable for attempting to strive to representing the people that pay tax dollars into supporting the system in all of our diversity. There is a sense that it is because of that and it's publicly funded, it's non-commercial. So it's not right now. I think perhaps public media is in a crisis because diverse content is very commercially viable. It's something that we see in documentaries are very commercially viable, something that was had found a home in public media. But we all know that this is not going to be forever. This is the documentary, gold rush, not golden ages end. So the non-commerciality of it is actually something that we want to maintain. I know Talia has other things that she wants to maintain. For instance, not all streamers even have standards and practices. Maybe standards and practices at PBS are too onerous, but maybe not having them at all is scarier. So I'd like to kind of keeping this in mind, if we can just get a little bit more into the specifics about how the system should look for it to really serve the people. Yeah, okay, Wendy wants to do that, and then Talia next.
Yeah, I'd love to just jump in. From as many folks know, the Alliance has been a champion of kind of eradicating unpaid internship and have developed the first federally registered national apprenticeship program in very much based on the BBC strategy, where you really can't get a job at the BBC unless you go through the apprenticeship scheme. And I feel like it's one of those, taking a step back from the standards and practices say that filmmakers need to know in order to be able for their content to get on the system, is I would love to see pathways to access to becoming knowledgeable, PBS-ready producers from a wide swath of people that didn't necessarily go to film school, were self-taught, were engaged with their community media organizations, and that the first folks to really grow a program like this, or however they could do it, but to think about every producer, every company that's already producing for PBS, having a network of BIPOC young people, trainees who are from every walk of life, who are those traditionally marginalized and excluded from opportunities to be able to even start creating content. What if the system actually took some responsibility and accountability for investing in the next generation filmmakers? And I think it's not something, we've been at the table talking to PBS and CPB and NPR, and we're getting there, we're getting closer. But I think there's a sense of not only, of course, let's be more kind of revitalized around new media, interactive, what does public media mean on the system? But investing in next generation, I think, is something that would be the way to almost guarantee creative equity moving forward.
I don't want to plug something I worked on, but related to that, we did create a free 60-minute online course that teaches people about the PBS editorial standards. That So I mean, a few hundred people have taken it and have heard that it's valuable for sort of walking you through what are the standards, what are the principles, and how do we apply them as sort of case studies from real experiences. So I don't know if it's appropriate to plug, but if you Google Public Media Learns, there's a PBS editorial standards course that you can take that I really encourage everyone to take as a way to help filmmakers understand, like, what are these standards? They can be a little impenetrable, but Public Media Learns. Anyway, earlier I neglected to mention that the work I'm doing on evolving those standards is very much in partnership with the Independent Television Service, with American Documentary, and with the Documentary Accountability Working Group. So I'm like standing on the shoulders of these giants. I want to make sure that you understand they get that credit. To Abby's question, the thing I was thinking about when you were talking was really localism, because PBS is a collective. We were founded in 1969 by local, independently owned and operated member stations. I work for those stations. There are 335 of them. They started founding in 1952 in Houston at the University of Houston. There are now hundreds of them, and it's brilliant, right? They came together in the late 60s and said, we want to leverage economies of scale. We want to pool these resources to create and acquire programming that no one of us could do, but they retain control of our board, they retain control of us. So I think when we're talking about systems and the way we can change and the way that we're different than commercial media, it is in that local businesses that are so vital. And I'm hesitant to name, KQED and KCET and
It's
TPT
hard, yeah.
because there's so many.
There's
but
so many,
they're
and
making
the fact that it's local and decentralized also makes it difficult to change. So in essence, it's kind of a conundrum here.
But
I
it gives
think,
you a chance to
yeah,
right? It gives you a
yeah.
chance to work
I think
in one
we'll
style
let
and
Ken jump in at this point, and then Louise, it looks like you have something you want to say too. Yeah.
One of the things I'm most hopeful about in terms of present day change is just the sophistication of information, right? I'm 25 years in the public media now, and I still get told by people I've been meeting with for 20 years, it's complicated. And I just find that really inexcusable. We're all aligned around this notion of a shared value system, right? We believe that the public media space, public media is critical and vital. There's never been real arguments about that, right? But when you hear it's complicated from someone you've met, and I have examples I've met 40 times, and I still hear that at some point in the explanation of why something's not possible, I can no longer accept that. And I just want to say, aside from working at BAVAC and AIR, I ran Public Radio Capital and Public Media Company. We used to acquire, it still is, Public Media Company, just tell Easy acquired Sun Star, Chicago. We acquired stations. And what I want to say is it's nuanced at a local level, but for the bottom line, the model is very simple. The economics, the bottom line of why people acquire stations, how they operate them, how they sustain them is very simple. I've had a dozen conversations in my 4 years of public media company where I was told by the station GM, I got to figure out how to get this one donor off Lawrence Welk. Then I can change the program. And I said, why don't you get them DVDs? Why don't you buy them a big screen TV? Why don't you get them HD radio, stick in their garage, stick in their living room? All that you're going to get back in your donation. Let's move on. It's really complicated. So that's where we are, right? I think we're hopefully, my hopefulness is that we can no longer stand behind the complicatedness of values and upholding them when they're really about specific instances of people, and that the information, the technology, the transparency requires action. So I think it's a lot of built-in excuses in the ecosystem for why things can't happen.
Louise?
I just wanted to add, in terms of trying to grow new talent, I think the digital landscape of releasing content now allows for a lot of experimentation, and I think PBS and all the public media entities realize that, and that really allows for us to try out new things. And the data is there, and I think everybody recognizes it. Broadcast numbers are declining, and streaming numbers have taken over, and everybody needs to pivot to how do you reach audiences differently. I know everyone, including all of our sister organizations in the Multicultural Alliance, are looking at how to reach audiences directly, in addition to reaching them through PBS. Local PBS stations are also their own community public media in that market, and they're also trying to reach their local community directly in different ways. But there's also a collective group of organizations who know we need to invest in the next generation, and I think the National Multicultural Alliance has done a lot of great work there. I know Black Public Media started a lot of initiatives to mentor and support emerging makers, but CAM, the Center for Asian American Media, also have a great program. Vision Maker Media and Pacific Islanders of Communication also provide their own training. We are just launching our own mentorship fellowship for young Latino makers, but there's also other great organizations within the public media landscape like Firelight Media and Real South and the Bay Area Video Coalition, who also has done great work to support young makers of color, and Cartemquin is another one in the Midwest that I think has done great work. Collectively, we are trying to invest in this next generation because we know that's the future. And young makers tend to go towards commercial media when they're first entering this field. They don't think about public media. So, they don't know about the opportunities, and it is a very myriad of organizations and individuals, so it's hard to figure out.
Yes, shout out to the CAM and Vision Maker Media Fellows who are at the conference right now. We're glad you're here. So everything that you've all said sounds wonderful. And so it's kind of baffling to me, if these are the folks that work in public media, why are we at the point that we are at right now? What does public media need as a part of the ecosystem in order to fulfill this future that we want from it? So one of the things that we've talked about in email threads, for those who don't know, so yes, broadcast numbers are declining. Public funding for public media is stagnant. In the US, we put less per dollar per person into public media than essentially any other established country. Talia told me the specific, you can
Yeah.
go ahead and say it.
Not just less, but in the European public media organizations, it's about $100 per resident, and in the US, it's about $1.03.
So for those who,
100.
yeah, this is not kidding. We like to think of public media as something that's quite powerful, but there's different scales of everything. It's powerful. I'm not denying that. So some of the initiatives that we've discussed over email include different types of funding schemes. Like for instance, well, if broadcast numbers are declining and that basically regulations on broadcast companies funded, for instance, public access, PEG in the US, public education and government access, which was a big funnel into public media decades ago. Should the streamers be regulated? We should be putting that money into public media. Should we be advocating for something like Minnesota's Legacy Amendment, which is a tax that is voted on by residents? This is why, for those of you who live in Minnesota, TPT, the Twin Cities, Minneapolis Public TV station, has so much of its own original content and programming. It's because they don't have to follow Talia's standards and practices rules because it's not publicly funded. It's funded through the Legacy Amendment. So I'm curious, like infrastructurally and systemically, if it's the system that needs to change, what needs to change around it?
Intention.
Exactly. Because all the money can come in, and if the intention hasn't changed and the people and the vision to be able to carry that out, then the money sits in the same thing, we keep doing it. So yeah, exactly.
Whose intention? The system's intention?
Yeah, I think.
If we're talking systemically, there's no intention, is there?
There's a high level of coordination at every level of public media. When I was at Bayback, we ran public access for San Francisco. We actively tried to buy a public television, public radio station, PCSM, to assure that there's a pipeline that's coordinated to reach audiences in the public. And it's a hard network to crack and to get into. But I think it's intention. You know, there's no reason that Ken Burns can't put online and have massively successful numbers. But there needs to be a willingness to put in there. Right? Who is the next great American storyteller? There's certainly more than one. So when is that commitment going to be made? Right? And when you have a highly coordinated system, there are absolutely local variations, but there needs to be a moment of leadership in which someone asserts, in this case, I would argue it's Paula, to say, this is what we're going to do because we have to take this first step to assure that 3 years from now, we have more space. Right. We talked about succession planning in nonprofit organizations at this conference. We talked about what's the thing. They're all parallels to this system. And they need to get called out. Should I stop?
No, keep going.
No, I mean, there's just a whole history. I mean, Wendy and I met in the early, and Luis too. We all met when documentary films were flagging. Wendy created the Producers Institute for New Media Technologies. And I would argue that breathed new life and opportunity for documentary filmmakers to be impact producers. And it was early stage, and you know, I'll call them out. MacArthur Foundation, I think Lauren's here. They jumped in and they believed in Wendy's vision. And we all kind of stood behind her and just said, go do it, Wendy. And she did. And no, but the story here is that it always takes an outlier. And when we look at the ecosystem of public media, what public media overall has failed to do is to acknowledge those people on the edge as outliers who are really pushing for change. Because you can't displace the center without allowing the edge to sort of move things around, you know, basic edge theory. But I think it's real. And I think what we have though is a collective intentional will to maintain what we have. Yeah.
And the outliers can be catalysts. You know, I remember when there was I think it was from CPB, back when we were at BAVAC, there was a fund for diversity and innovation, and they did a call out for projects that were, you know, going to reflect a deeper, more multicultural reality and be innovative. Ultimately, though, very few, we got one of those grants, but there was a chipping away of what the actual storytelling would be, because the system didn't know what to do yet with digital content, with interactive content, with audience engagement. And so they ended up greenlighting, you know, a cool film that was actually like 3 chapters, you know, so that it wasn't innovative. And it was certainly featuring subjects of color, but it's like, wait a minute. Why was there a call out for innovation when there was really no capacity to greenlight something that was beyond the screen? And so we keep, and somehow now being older and not too much wiser, I think that there's a role for an institution, but I think we could all use the institution to be able to potentially bring in those outliers with a little more speed and a little more vision to say, yes, the system could reflect this, because when it does and it does it right, the potential for impact is huge.
I just want to say that I've been in this system for 20 years now, which is a long time. And I think that there are key figures within the system that have intention, and it's those people that help, you know, make these changes happen and push it forward. And I think there's also certain events like, you know, what we experienced in the last 3 years that, you know, help also change that landscape and push things forward. And I've seen good movements now in that, and I hope to continue to see it, you know, from PBS, but also other areas in the system. And it's something that I think, you know, the National Multicultural Alliance has been, you know, striving for the 47 years that we've, you know, been in existence. So it's not something new for us, but we want to continue to help find, you know, new ways to showcase that work, help create opportunities for BIPOC makers, and, you know, and see that how else we can get content out there.
Yeah.
I'm going to just make a little bit of a logistics announcement. because we have all four of our esteemed panelists here with us today, we actually only have one microphone for the question and answer portion. So as we're wrapping up the discussion part of this event, we're going to ask everybody who would like to ask a question to actually go to this side of the room in the aisle. If you could line up at the front, so we don't have to run the microphone so far to where you are seated. So again, if you're in the room, you'd like to ask a question, we're going to line up over here where actually Jen, my former colleague, if you could raise your hand. Yeah, could line up right there. Thank you. And same thing on questions into the chat box. Ken, last words?
Yeah, I'm sort of trying to temper this, but I've been at conferences over the years, not in the IDA circuit, but the public media circuit. And I remember I was at a conference in Austin, Texas, many years ago, at least 8 years ago, or something like that. And someone brought up winning, right? Like, how do we win? How do we win the local market? How do we win more audience? And everyone was so upset. And I thought that was so refreshing to finally hear. I realized, it dawned on me, I hadn't heard people talking about competing. And yet that is exactly what these businesses do. And they fundamentally operate by principle of competing. And I think we're lacking that. And again, I feel like, and I felt like, and I recently did part of a job in which I felt like I could either fight nonstop, and that would be my personal fight, or I could let the organization evolve without me because I was going to take it down. And it was also a moment where I woke up and I said, I actually want to fight and I'm willing to fight for public media. And we need some good fights. So I would just urge you to join me or to have your own, but we got to push for change. It's complicated, it is no longer acceptable, and it's actually irresponsible. There's too much information that's just not being shared.
Anyone else? Yeah, let's stop to that. Last words before we go into the gauntlet of questions.
If we have a minute, I want to sort of pivot back to some of the things I was alluding to earlier in terms of where I don't think we should evolve our mandates and our standards. I think we are on the verge of evolving to adopt a lot of what you see in the documentary accountability working group framework that I talked about in terms of participant rights, which I hope makes these films that come to Independent Lens, to American Documentary, and to these other strands like digital studios more inclusive. There are various places where I think preserving our mandates are really essential. And so going back to that thing about our standards being onerous and restrictive, there are places, originally, of course, I was defensive about that. And now I'm sort of thinking about how do I make it less onerous and restrictive in some ways? And how do I lean into embracing, like Abby was saying, yes, it's more restrictive than a commercial streaming platform that has no standards, but is it restrictive for a reason? And is it serving a purpose? And so just a few quick examples, if it's okay, of films that have not worked for PBS. And I'm not going to name names, but films that have not worked for PBS because of the standards that we're committed to upholding. So one is accurately representing the quotations of your participants and not creating composite sentences where you take a noun from one part of what they were saying and a verb from another part. And
no frankenbiting.
Yes, no frankenbiting, no composite sentences. We have a whole 2-pager about how to think about this. Now, of course, editing down and condensing material is a huge part of your craft, and I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't be doing that, but frankenbiting is the issue here, and that's something we're committed to that I know other places are not committed to. The other example is around disclosure around funding sources. So a lot of wealthy donors are now funneling their money through something called donor advised funds where they want to preserve anonymity. Just about every week I get this question, which is, can this funder be anonymous? They really want to be anonymous. And there are very few bright line answers in the standards world. It's almost all gray, but that is the one place where I'm very hard and fast. And I say your funder cannot be anonymous. How is the audience going to judge the credibility of this work if they're not able to know who the funder is? So we're really committed to that, and disclosures around why is this person anonymous, is, things around anonymity. We're committed to certain aspects of the standards that are going to be more onerous than what you see elsewhere.
All right.
But
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, we actually have this question specifically for you that's already in chat, so you'll get to talk again. Wendy or Louise, any last short words?
I'll just say that, we continue to support BIPOC creators. That's been our mission with the Multicultural Alliance. And it's been great to see all the work that's been done. We want to continue to push that forward and see all of our communities being able to tell our own stories. And that's an important part, I think, for all of our organizations. There's definitely more work that needs to be done, to keep that moving forward. And we recognize that, and we are here to try to keep striving for, that equity in that space.
All right. So I actually see online that there are 3 questions in the question box. I actually cannot see that on my tablet. So if you can move your questions, which I can see on the screen behind Ken right here, into the chat, that would be very helpful. I'm not ignoring you. I just cannot see. Zoom is also a system that prevents access, but I will say. And again, are there any questions in the audience? Are you just very shy today? Okay, there's one already here. Let's run yep.
I would like to raise a question that really hasn't been addressed. My name is Lynn Goldfarb, and I do a lot of documentaries for PBS, but lately I've been doing smaller, low budget. And I think one of the problems that if you're not part of the strands and you want your documentaries to get on PBS and PBS will accept it in distribution, you have to take on the expense of E&O insurance. If you are working with a local station, and I know it works that way in Southern California, they will cover your E&O as part of their policy. But if it goes out of the system, out of the local area. So I am wondering why PBS can't cover that, because it is an onerous expense that we have to take on ourselves.
Thank you, Linda.
I can certainly take back that question and concern to my colleagues in the standards and media ethics work that I do. I'm not so familiar with the insurance and the issues around that, but I'd happy to meet up after and get your information and bring that back to my colleagues at PBS. It sounds like it's an issue. I think a lot of programs are coming through local stations, and that's the ideal. And having it covered through their insurance would be a great approach. But if you're doing work directly with PBS, which is less common, but I appreciate you raising the issue, and I'll certainly bring it back.
I would say that everybody in this room agrees with Lynn and will want to see that addressed in some way, because it's a common issue for independent filmmakers, the E&O issue.
And I would just say, if you get the it's complicated answer, there's a precedent with music that CPB actually fully pays the sound exchange ASCAP licensing rights for music that's carried through the station programming. So I can't see why something like that could be negotiated.
And thankfully, they're obligated to do that by statute, which is really good. Yeah, I won't just say it's complicated. I promise.
All right, we do have in chat from Joyce Hart, question for Talia. How would you define advocacy in a way that is objectionable to the new standards and practices? Since all of our work is advocacy of a sort and we accept funding that brings the audience with it, what are a few caveats? So I guess it's like if this is going to be more friendly for filmmakers, but this ban against advocacy is still what has changed perhaps there?
Well, one of the first things I did when I came into this role a few years ago was delete objectivity and balance from our core principles. So if you look at our current editorial standards, Objectivity is no longer one of our core principles. Balance is not. Objectivity is nonsense. There is no such thing. And balance, sense of false equivalence that should not be there. So we've deleted both of those. They're not part of our standards anymore. And so I think that we absolutely do have, I'm most familiar with the work coming in through independent lens and POV. And I think that I don't think I can define advocacy for you. Did you hear, which I think was sort of the question, but I think that when I see these films coming from independent lens and POV, they look like they are, I think they could be described as advocacy in certain respects. So there's films that sit with me like Trapped by Dawn Porter, which was phenomenal, Pervert Park on POV, and those have a message, certainly, and I don't think we're opposed to films that have a message.
Yeah, and Erica Dilday talked about On the Divide as part of her keynote, right, about the abortion clinics. But I think one thing that you mentioned earlier, I think, Talia, that still, I would assume you count, perhaps not as advocacy, but more in terms of, actually, I'd be curious, like, for instance, in Loaded Money, another panel that we have, there were certain situations that come up that those filmmakers were talking about, where, for instance, a foundation, like a NGO that works in African countries, I'm trying to use scare quotes here, okay, just to be very clear, wants to fund a documentary about their work, for instance. Is that what you consider advocacy, or does that fall under something else,
Yeah, so we still would not allow films that are that we see as self-promotional. So films we've said no to, for instance, would be one that was funded by an oil and gas company about oil spill cleanup, one about the invention of a vaccine funded by a pharmaceutical company. And those might seem obvious, but they're out there. And some of them were really good films. So we've also said no to certain films funded by certain government agencies that were profiling the work of that government agency or people who were affiliated with that government agency. So I wasn't thinking of it as advocacy. I think of those as sort of self-promotional films that we will continue to not accept, but you can certainly take those to Netflix and Hulu and they will stream them.
Absolutely.
It's a fact.
Yes, we know of many examples. Any other questions? I still see that there are questions in the question box online. I still can't see them. So if you want me to pass them on to the panel, you will have to ask you to kindly copy and paste your question into the chat box. Any other questions here in this audience?
Can I ask the audience a question? I'm really curious what you guys what's the future you dream for public media? How would it be better for from your individual perspectives as a filmmaker or a programmer or a funder or whoever you are? What's the public media system that you guys want to see?
And
Shout
I'm
stuff.
going to say that funding your films is going to be a given. So things other than getting your films funded. Anyone? I see Lynn again. I see. Is that a hand or are you scratching your neck? Can you wait for the microphone 1 second?
Yeah.
Can we run the mic to him? Yeah.
It's simply more of an ecosystem, more small grants, local projects.
More ecosystem for small local projects. What else?
I'll speak again. I would say that more consistency in broadcast times and dates. And while I understand that you might say it's complicated because every station can program, it's impossible for us to promote our documentaries. And also PBS money for promotion has almost disappeared.
Online, we have some answers. Marge Sophinia says, real marketing dollars, exclamation point. Joyce Hart again, I want public media to be a repository of the past. And Monica Navarro says plus to real and intentional marketing dollars. PBS is not a deep catalog of indie docs. Yes, there's an amazing, so the Who Killed Vincent Chin rebroadcast, for instance, part of the, Wendy?
We haven't talked yet at all about the massive public archive that is being created and what's being done to create a culture of access and sharing in the future. And I mean, the Alliance has been looking at this for a few years. Thank you to MacArthur Foundation for helping us with bringing together digital archivists from all over the world to think about this. But it kind of comes back to, there's a sense, yes, we have to figure out who owns the work, how do we protect those inside of it, but also how do we promote a remix culture where these films and the footage coming from these films just doesn't stay holed up in institutions, but is actually made available as the full pieces and all of that. And I feel like that in some ways is a call to action and responsibility for the system to be able to see what kind of open archive they might get behind. Something I think about all the time.
I think that's so important. We have such narrow, we receive such narrow rights windows in these films. And I was just at lunch talking to someone about this phenomenal film, A Real Boy, from a few years ago. I forget if it was Independent Lens or POV, but I love them both. POV. It was phenomenal.
That sounds like someone from POV saying that, but yes, thank you.
You should all go watch it, but unfortunately you can't. And it's the most maddening thing in the world because there's this evergreen content that should be out there, and let's make it happen.
Yeah, I want to second that, third that, but also, I also, when we're doing Viewers Like Us, we talked about, what is the lost opportunity if Ken Burns does Muhammad Ali? Does that erase the opportunity for anyone else to do it now? But let's encourage them to redo it with someone else directing it and see how it does and match the effort and investment in marketing. Let's do some of that work in terms of being innovative and test the theory. So I think there's an opportunity to revisit a lot of titles with different producers and directors behind that.
In case you can't see behind you in chat. Yes.
That was Grace's idea.
It was Grace's idea. All right. Yes. Monica, by the way, also said in chat again, double ITVS's, the NMCA's and POV's budget, and triple World Channel's budget. That's actually something I'd like to point out right here. So World Channel is the digital channel run based out of GBH, the Boston station. And there's disparities even within the public media system about how well resourced these strands are. And for filmmakers and stations that are doing local programming that are not in the strands. So even when we talk about public media, as Ken mentioned, or someone mentioned earlier, as being a monolith, there are disparities within public media that also need to be addressed. Okay, so now the hands are going up. We're going to go here first, to you, and then to you next. So if we can get a microphone.
Sorry.
Great, yes. So I had asked earlier for everybody to be on that side of the room, so I didn't see you, but that's, okay, yeah.
She brought it over when I wanted to respond to the question about the future of.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So as somebody who's responsible for marketing documentaries, I agree, more funding for marketing. Because as we know, audiences are more and more fragmented. It's harder and harder for us to get attention on these documentaries. And also as somebody who's responsible for marketing, I'd really like to see more investment in our streaming, the PBS video app, how we reach audiences, specifically millennial and Gen X audiences, and Gen Z audiences, because we know that the boomers are have been the primary focus, but we really have to start cultivating new audiences if we want public media to continue to be viable.
Yeah, also as a millennial, I feel like I'm aging out of being young anyway, so what's going on with the Zoomers? Thank you. So we're going to go, okay, yep, but I don't actually know where the microphone is. Okay, great, thank you.
Hi, I'm a fairly new documentary filmmaker, and I'm happy to say that I actually currently have my first feature documentary on PBS right now. Thank you. And we actually won a public media award just last month as well. So that was really exciting. And Louis, you were one of the people that helped connect us to PBS. So through the NALEAP Summit, that's where we met you.
What film was it?
LA, A Queer History.
Oh.
It's
okay,
a
yes,
documentary
yeah.
about the LGBT history of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Thank you. And actually, I guess I'll continue bragging really quick. We got award. I found out yesterday as well, so we're excited about that. So, but since you asked about what we would like to see with PBS, I can tell you my experience was really great. As far as working with the people, Michelle Merker was the one we worked with, who was incredible. But it was a 2-hour documentary, and they asked us to split it into 2 parts, which made sense. So I had to cut out 18 minutes of the whole film to do that. I had to create the underwriting pods myself, and there was no money. No, I didn't get paid to do any of that. And it was hours and hours of work that I had to do. And it was very difficult cutting 18 minutes out of your film that you've been working on for 10 years. So that was really, they did give us a fee, licensing fee, obviously, but it was, PBS, so it was fairly small. But I would like to see more compensation, as anyone would, to things like that, because I did a lot of work and I didn't get paid for it. So that's it.
Just curious if you ended up talking maybe to PBS distribution. I mean, I think I could see an audience for it through their Amazon Prime channel.
I don't know. I know they didn't mention anything like that to me, but I know that PBS has it through the end of the year and next year. I don't know what's going to happen with it after that, but I didn't know anything about distribution.
You should talk to the folks. I'll connect you to them too.
Okay.
More later. There's ways to navigate the system, as we always know. Can we get the microphone? There was a man with his hand up before, and then we'll go to the woman. Yes, but he's been having his hand up for a while. If we can get the microphone. Yep, right there.
All right, thank you. So, just taking a bit into what Ken was saying earlier about competition, I think that's something that myself as a emerging documentary filmmaker would like to be seeing more on public media. How are we going to compete with the larger streaming services? And
now this is what I've been waiting for.
Because for example, small a documentary thanks to LPB that went on to PBS of 5 minutes, and the typical audience that I get through my documentaries was very difficult. That is young audiences. Sorry. It was very difficult to get them to see the film like in the platforms or where it was available in the media. I'm sorry, in the digital world, right? In the web and all the apps. So for me, the future of public media, I will summarize it in 3 things, or what I would like to see as a person committed to public media. One is really competing, like how can we organize as filmmakers to all be going into the same direction, right? So rather than sometimes be working of our own projects and sometimes competing, sometimes against each other, because it's really frustrating sometimes that I met here a lot of great filmmakers and we're all competing for the same grant. So how can we really try to work with that in a more coordinated way, so at least all the projects happen, or the majority of the projects happen, even if it means redistributing something. So for me, it's not necessarily the stuff of more money allocated, because understanding the cutting in public funding, but how can we redistribute to give the opportunity to more filmmakers that are hungry, so that we can make the projects happen, and in that sense also coordinate the how we are going to compete against these
Yeah.
big
Did you have
companies.
a third point? You said you wanted
Yeah,
three things.
and the third point is obviously about younger audiences, like to see really public media talk to the millennials and beyond, because I really feel that people don't even sometimes understand that it exists outside from a school or university assignment. So thank you.
All right, and then I think we're about out of time, so to the woman right there. Oh, no, sorry, behind you, yes. We'll give you the last word on what you want to see from public media.
I hope it's, oh, what I want to see.
Or if you have a question.
I do have a
Okay,
question.
well, good, well,
Pressure.
I hope it's a short question.
Yes, I will make it short. Thank you. I wanted to go back to learning more about the editorial standards and editorial independence of PBS, because I was a part of a short film that was in conversation with Real South, and it wasn't accepted because it was funded by a nonprofit, like in part by nonprofits. So I just wanted to learn more about that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this dovetails with what the previous person was saying, because I think the way that we compete is by, we're not going to be able to compete on money. And so we're going to have to try to compete on trust, on trying to be independent, credible, and localism, and trying to lean into local engagement and local impact. In terms of the issue you're talking about, this gets to the idea we were talking about earlier around self-promotion, and I don't know the specifics, but if a nonprofit organization funds a film and then personnel from that nonprofit organization appear in the film, or other grantees of the nonprofit organization appear in the film, then it may not be acceptable on PBS, because what we don't want to do is have an organization work on some project that they think is really, really great, and it may be really great, and then have them fund content about that project that they're working on, so that they are sort of on both sides of that. We may love to have content about what they're doing, but don't want them to be funding it. And this applies all the way from up to like NIH and other federal agencies want to fund things about their initiatives. But those aren't the sorts of projects that we're comfortable distributing. That may have been the issue here, but the devil's in the details, as Abby said, and I like to watch these things and really dig into them when they come my way. But it's a really good question.
Well, we are about out of time, but that feels kind of like a weird thing to end on. Yeah, like will not be a part of public media. So actually, maybe I could, maybe I'll just ask one really short wrap-up question to everybody here on stage. Thank you again to everybody who has joined us in this room, to our panelists. But I'm curious, as we look around in kind of this vast chaos or very simple system in Ken's eyes, that is public media. What is something that really gives you hope right now, that you find very inspiring from the work that is happening?
I'll start because it's what's inspired me. I think every day I've had this job, and it's all of the filmmakers here and that I deal with. It's the passion that I see in the storytelling that they want to do, and the passion about their subjects. And I think that really is what inspires me and keeps me going.
I think for every question or every answer that's meant to stop the conversation or reason that's given, there's an answer. And there's more than enough talent, and it's a matter of will. So I think that gives me hope.
I'm inspired every day by the new voices coming up, by the folks who want to be storytellers, not just for their own individual stories, but also to uplift the identity and power and potential of their communities. It's an amazing time to be working with young filmmakers, and PBS's and public media is where a lot of them want to go. So it helps me wake up every morning.
I'm inspired by the same thing that Wendy just said, but I just want to name like some of my favorite new talents that have come through public media recently. Danielle Bainbridge inspires me every day with PBS Origins. Arthur Buckner and Nare Soul on Soundfield out of TPT is my favorite show in public media. And I don't want to I'm not promoting these things, but these people inspire me. Baratunde Thurston, also out of TPT, inspires me, as does Mona Haydar. Oh my goodness, the Great Muslim American Road Trip. She is a force of nature. And if you haven't seen her music videos on YouTube, oh my goodness, go search Mona Haydar right now, because she is a force of nature. And the fact that she would choose to come to public media makes me feel really privileged and really proud and really hopeful.
Thank you all so much. Let's give everyone here a round of applause.